A billionaire businessman, Daniel Prescott, built his life on power, wealth, and influence. But when he begins to suspect that his new wife, Linda, is tormenting his children, his world is shattered. Determined to uncover the truth, Daniel takes a daring risk. He goes undercover as a lowly plumber in his own home. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. For weeks, Daniel hides behind the disguise of a plumber, blending into the background of the mansion he once called his sanctuary. As Jake, a rough-around-the-edges blue-collar worker, Daniel gains unrestricted access to every corner of his home. But what he sees behind closed doors leaves him sickened. Linda's coldness knows no bounds, and the children, once full of life, are visibly afraid. But it's not just Linda's cruelty that surprises Daniel. It's Maria, the housemaid, who risks everything to shield the children from harm. As Daniel's suspicions deepen, he uncovers the quiet strength of the woman who's willing to fight back against the forces threatening the safety of his family. With each passing day, Daniel edges closer to the truth. But nothing can prepare him for the explosive moment when he reveals himself to Linda. What he uncovers will change everything. The shocking conclusion to this tale of love, revenge, and justice is one you won't forget. It all started with a seemingly perfect marriage. Daniel had it all: wealth, success, and a beautiful wife. But beneath the surface, cracks began to form. He never expected that the woman he trusted could harm his children. But when the signs became undeniable, Daniel had no choice but to take matters into his own hands. This is the story of how a billionaire went undercover in his own mansion, and how one woman, a maid, would change everything. Daniel Prescott's life hadn't always been so uncertain. With a multi-billion-dollar empire, he thought he had it all: success, prestige, and a beautiful family. But when he married Linda, a woman who seemed perfect for his world, the cracks began to appear. His children, Sarah and James, once happy and full of life, began to withdraw from him, growing fearful of their stepmother. Daniel tried to brush it off at first, but there was something he couldn't ignore. When Sarah came to him one night, shaking, telling him about the punishment Linda had given her for a small mistake, Daniel knew that things were not as they seemed. This is where Daniel's journey truly began, a journey of uncovering dark secrets, finding unexpected allies, and fighting to protect the ones he loved. The decision to go undercover as a plumber was not an easy one for Daniel, but he knew it was the only way to uncover the truth. The weight of suspicion had been gnawing at him for weeks, and his gut told him that Linda was hiding something far darker than mere control. If he was going to save his children, he had to see the truth with his own eyes. So, Daniel hired a plumbing service to teach him the basics. It didn't take long before he found himself fumbling with pipes, hoses, and tools, trying to blend into the role of a humble tradesman. The transformation was almost complete. He'd bought a fake beard, a cap, worn-out jeans, and scuffed boots from a thrift shop. When he looked in the mirror, he barely recognized the man staring back at him. Gone was the polished billionaire in designer suits. In his place was Jake, a blue-collar worker with a thick accent and a rough-around-the-edges appearance. Daniel knew that Linda, with her obsessive attention to detail, would never suspect that the plumber was, in fact, her husband. He told her that he'd hired a temporary plumber for a few weeks to fix the repairs around the house, a harmless lie, and one that would provide him with the perfect cover. He watched her nod in agreement, her indifferent expression betraying nothing. Little did she know, the man in front of her was the one person she least expected to be watching her every move. The first day as Jake was harder than Daniel had anticipated. He had expected some awkwardness, but nothing prepared him for the reality of pretending to be a stranger in his own home. Every movement felt like a performance, and every conversation was a tightrope walk. He spent hours fumbling with pipes in the basement, struggling to master the mechanics of plumbing, all the while keeping a watchful eye on his wife and children. His heart broke with each glance at Sarah and James. The once joyous children now seemed like strangers, their eyes dull with fear. Linda, on the other hand, seemed colder, more distant. Every time she entered the room, her icy presence seemed to freeze the air around them. It was subtle, but Daniel noticed it immediately. The way she snapped at Sarah for spilling a glass of water, her harsh voice cutting through the silence. The sharpness in her tone when she told James to sit still was enough to make Daniel's blood boil. The children's eyes darted nervously whenever she approached, a fear that was impossible to ignore. Daniel had always known Linda as a woman who demanded perfection. But now, there was something far more sinister behind her sharp words and controlling behavior. He watched as she belittled Sarah for the smallest of mistakes, her voice dripping with disdain. "Why can't you ever do anything right?" she would sneer, her eyes narrowed in judgment. It was like watching a woman he didn't recognize. The signs of abuse were becoming impossible to ignore. By the second day, Daniel's suspicions were confirmed. He saw Linda scream at Sarah for something trivial, her temper flaring when the child couldn't get her room clean enough. She threatened to send her to bed without dinner, a punishment that made Sarah tremble with fear. And when Sarah finally finished, her face pale with anxiety, Daniel's heart shattered. But the most unsettling moment came later that evening. Daniel overheard a conversation from the other room. Linda was speaking on the phone in hushed tones, her voice sweet and conspiratorial, but the words sent chills down his spine. "Don't worry. They'll never know you're coming back. I've got it all under control." Daniel froze, the blood draining from his face. Who was she talking to? And what exactly was she controlling? It was a discovery that made his stomach turn. Linda had always been controlling, but now there was a layer of deception he hadn't expected. There was something far worse at play here, and the more Daniel tried to uncover, the deeper the rabbit hole seemed to go. What was Linda hiding? And who was the mysterious person on the other end of the line? Daniel knew he had to continue playing the part, but each passing moment felt heavier than the last. He was getting closer to the truth, but he feared what he might find when the last pieces of the puzzle finally came together. Maria had always been a quiet, constant presence in the Prescott household. In her early 40s, she was the kind of woman who faded into the background, diligently attending to her duties without complaint. Her work as the family's maid was meticulous, yet her heart was always more attuned to the needs of the children than the perfection of the house. Sarah and James had never known a time without Maria. She had cared for them since they were babies, providing the gentle touch and nurturing presence that most children only find in a mother. Maria was more than just a maid to them. She was a second mother. She was there for the early morning wake-ups, the school drop-offs, and the late-night comforting after bad dreams. Her kindness was a balm for their hearts, especially in a house that had grown increasingly cold. But recently, Maria had begun to notice subtle shifts in the atmosphere, ones that even the children couldn't hide. There was an invisible weight hanging over the household, a tension that seemed to coil tighter every day. Maria had seen it long before Daniel did, the fear in Sarah and James's eyes whenever Linda entered the room. It wasn't the normal fear of a parent's stern look or a scolding. It was a deeper, more suffocating kind of fear, the kind that spoke of something sinister. Sarah, once full of energy and curiosity, now flinched at the sound of Linda's voice, and James, who used to be playful and boisterous, had become quieter, withdrawn, always looking over his shoulder as if waiting for a storm to break. Maria had also seen Linda's growing temper. The woman who had once been charming and elegant had become colder, more controlling with each passing day. Maria watched as Linda imposed strange rules on the children, scolding them for minor mistakes, for not being perfect. A glass of spilled water, a room that wasn't tidied just right. These were the things that set Linda off. And when Linda yelled, the children cowered. It didn't take a trained eye to see the emotional toll it was taking. Maria's growing concern turned into a quiet resolve one evening after a particularly violent outburst from Linda. The incident had come on suddenly, as they often did. Sarah had been trying to complete her homework in the kitchen when Linda stormed in, furious over a small mistake. With a harsh swipe, Linda slapped Sarah across the face for missing a word in her reading. The shock of the blow stunned Sarah, her lip trembling as she tried to hold back tears. Maria had been there, in the next room, and she saw everything. She had always known Linda to be strict, but this was something else. This wasn't discipline. This was cruelty. It was no longer just a matter of correcting mistakes. It was a matter of breaking spirits. Maria felt a surge of fury and helplessness rise in her chest. The children didn't deserve this. They were just children. She couldn't just stand by and do nothing. That night, after Linda had gone to bed, Maria found Sarah in her room. The girl was lying on her bed, her body curled up into a ball, the remnants of tears still glistening on her cheeks. Maria sat beside her, brushing her hair back softly. "What's wrong, my sweet girl?" Maria asked, her voice low and comforting. "I'm scared, Maria," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm scared all the time, especially when Daddy's gone. When he's not here, everything changes. It's like the rules are different. Everything's different." Maria's heart ached at Sarah's words. She had always prided herself on being a motherly figure in the house, but now the fear in Sarah's voice was like a knife in her chest. Maria knew that she had to protect the children, but how could she, a mere maid, stand up to the woman of the house? How could she defy Linda, the very woman who had the power to dismiss her at any moment? "I promise you, Sarah," Maria said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I will protect you. I will protect both of you. No one should ever make you feel like this in your own home." Sarah's eyes widened, a small flicker of hope lighting up her face. But Maria could see the doubt there too, the understanding that her promises might not be enough. Still, Maria kissed Sarah's forehead gently, promising her silently that she would find a way to make it right. As she tucked Sarah in that night, Maria made a vow to herself. She knew the risks. If Linda ever found out that Maria was watching over the children like this, it could cost her everything. But Maria's love for the children, her need to protect them, was stronger than any fear she might feel. The next day, as Maria went about her duties, she glanced toward the children's rooms and felt a renewed sense of determination. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was their protector, and she would do whatever it took to ensure that Sarah and James would never again be subjected to the cruelty that had seeped into their home. Maria didn't know yet how she would help them, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to stand by and watch them suffer any longer. As the days passed, Daniel grew increasingly consumed by his undercover mission. Hidden in the shadows, he watched the house he had once felt so secure in unravel before his eyes. The man he had become, Jake the Plumber, was just a cover, but it was no longer just a role he played. It was the only way he could see the truth. Each day, the tension in the house seemed to rise. Linda's cruelty, which had once been occasional, became a constant. Daniel watched as she snapped at the children for the smallest of offenses, her words sharp and cutting. What struck him most was the coldness in her eyes. It wasn't the reprimanding look of a strict parent, but the calculated gaze of someone who derived pleasure from wielding power over those more vulnerable. The children, once so full of life, became more withdrawn with every passing day. Sarah no longer ran to him for comfort when he returned home, and James barely spoke at all. Daniel had never seen his children so broken, so afraid, and it tore at him more deeply than any business deal ever had. It was on the third week that Daniel overheard something that would change everything. He was fixing a sink in the guest bathroom when Linda's voice reached his ears. She was speaking in hushed tones, as though unaware of his presence. He froze, holding his breath, trying to make sense of the words. "I can't keep doing this." Linda's voice was low but unmistakably frantic. "Daniel's starting to ask too many questions. If he finds out about us, the kids, there'll be a problem. You have to help me with them. It's the only way." Daniel's heart lurched in his chest. The words pierced through his carefully constructed calm like a knife. What was she talking about? The children? Linda continued, her voice growing steadier. They're getting in the way. I'll handle them the way we talked about. If Daniel finds out, well, it won't matter. He'll be out of the picture soon enough. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. The conversation was unclear, but the implications were chilling. Linda wasn't just abusing his children. She was planning something far worse. And the more he thought about it, the more it became clear that her behavior was no longer just about control. It was about something far darker, something that might involve violence. His blood ran cold at the thought. But it wasn't just Linda's actions that had him reeling. The worst discovery came when Daniel realized that someone else in the house had been quietly fighting back. Maria, the maid. He had always trusted Maria, but until now, he hadn't fully grasped the extent of her involvement. He'd noticed it in small ways at first. Maria slipping extra food to the children when Linda wasn't looking, gently comforting them when Linda would erupt into a rage. Maria had been the only one who didn't back down, who wasn't afraid to step in when the children were being harmed. It was subtle, but it was there. Maria had been silently protecting them all along. Daniel's heart swelled with a mix of gratitude and guilt. Maria had risked her job, her livelihood, to shield his children from the woman he had married. The truth hit him with full force. This wasn't just about his children's safety. It was about the life he had built, the family he had entrusted to someone who was turning out to be a far greater threat than he ever imagined. The discovery was the turning point Daniel needed. He could no longer remain a passive observer. He couldn't watch from the sidelines while Linda's cruelty continued. His instincts had been right from the beginning, but now he had undeniable proof. Linda wasn't just a harsh stepmother. She was a danger to his children. And with Maria's quiet bravery, Daniel knew he had an ally, someone willing to stand up to the darkness that had taken root in his home. The next steps were clear. Daniel would confront Linda. The truth couldn't stay buried any longer. But first, he needed to gather more evidence to ensure that there would be no escape for Linda once her true nature was exposed. The final piece of the puzzle was falling into place. The tension in Daniel's chest had been building for weeks, a slow-burning pressure that made each passing day feel heavier than the last. He had seen enough, heard enough, to know the truth about Linda. He had gathered the pieces, but now it was time to confront her, time to stop pretending. Every day as Jake, the plumber, Daniel had felt the weight of the disguise, but it wasn't just the act that had become unbearable. It was the emotional toll of watching his children suffer. Each moment of cruelty he witnessed from Linda was like a dagger in his heart. The harsh words, the sharp reprimands, the emotional abuse, they all piled up, each one an assault on his peace, on his family. And yet, he had been forced to stay in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to act. The days of watching silently were over. Daniel spent the nights collecting evidence, hidden recordings of Linda's tirades and cruel behavior. He had captured everything, her yelling at the children for trivial things, her threats, the casual disregard for their emotions. He knew the recordings would be his weapon, the undeniable proof that Linda was not the woman he thought he married. But the more he heard, the more the emotional weight of it all began to crush him. The voice on the other end of the recordings wasn't just his wife. It was a stranger, someone he didn't recognize, someone capable of harming the children he loved. As Daniel sat in the small, dimly lit motel room, listening to the recordings one more time, his heart ached with the realization of what had happened to his family. He had been blind to Linda's cruelty for far too long. But now, with the truth laid bare, there could be no more excuses. Linda had to be confronted. Meanwhile, Maria's actions became more courageous by the day. At first, her efforts had been small. A kind word to Sarah when Linda wasn't around, a gentle touch to soothe James when he flinched at the sound of Linda's voice. But now, Maria was stepping in whenever Linda grew too harsh. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She had become a shield for the children, silently standing between them and the storm that was Linda. It wasn't easy. Maria knew the risks. Every time she spoke up, every time she stepped in to protect the children, she risked losing her job, her livelihood. Linda's temper was unpredictable, and Maria knew that crossing her could mean the end of her position in the house. But Maria couldn't stand by any longer. She couldn't watch the children suffer without doing something. One afternoon, when Linda humiliated Sarah for a minor mistake, Maria couldn't hold back. As Linda stormed off in a huff, leaving Sarah standing in tears, Maria walked over, knelt down beside the girl and whispered, "You did nothing wrong, my sweet girl. Don't let her make you feel small." The act was simple, quiet, but it was the first real moment of defiance against Linda's reign of fear. Maria knew it wouldn't solve everything, but it was a small victory for Sarah, a small act of resistance against the darkness in the house. But even as Maria took bold steps to protect the children, Daniel was coming to a breaking point. It was the phone call he overheard that pushed him into action. He had been fixing a sink near the kitchen when Linda's voice floated through the walls again, low and conspiratorial. "You know how much I have to control them," Linda was saying to someone, her tone flat and cold. "They'll never tell Daniel anything, not with the way I've got it all under control. But if he finds out, we'll have to take care of it. You'll help, won't you?" Daniel's blood turned to ice. He had always suspected something was off, but now he had confirmation. The betrayal, the manipulation, it was all there, clear as day. Linda wasn't just abusing his children. She had plans for them, plans that went far beyond control, plans that could destroy everything. In that moment, Daniel knew what had to be done. The act of pretending to be a plumber, the disguise, the waiting, it was over. The time for action had come. He couldn't stand by any longer. He had enough evidence to expose Linda for what she was. The moment of truth was coming, and Daniel couldn't afford to wait any longer. Tomorrow, everything would change. The confrontation with Linda would happen, and there would be no turning back. It was time to protect his children, once and for all. The days that followed Daniel's discovery felt like an unbearable countdown to something inevitable. He had the proof, the hidden recordings, and enough clarity to know what had to be done. But as he continued to watch Linda's cruelty unfold in the house, he found himself growing more impatient, more furious. Every harsh word, every brutal punishment, seemed to slice deeper into him. His children, once bright and full of life, had become shells of themselves, their fear palpable in every room. The facade of normalcy was a lie. It was one afternoon, as Daniel was fixing a faucet near the kitchen, that he overheard the argument. His heart clenched as he heard Linda's voice, raised in anger, snapping at Sarah for some minor infraction. "You think you can get away with this?" Linda's words echoed in the hallway, sharp and venomous. "You can't do anything right. What's wrong with you? You should be ashamed of yourself." Sarah's trembling voice responded in a small, defensive whisper, but it was drowned out by Linda's shouting. That's when Daniel heard something unexpected, a voice that wasn't Sarah's or Linda's. Maria's voice, calm yet firm, cut through the tension. "You can't hurt them anymore," Maria said, her voice unwavering. "Not under my watch. I won't let you do this." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. Maria, the gentle, quiet maid who had always kept to herself, was standing her ground, confronting Linda directly. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Maria, who had always been the silent protector, was finally taking a stand. Daniel stayed hidden behind the wall, barely breathing, as the words played out. He could hear the shock in Linda's voice as she retorted, "And what do you think you can do about it, huh? You're just the help. You think I'll let you interfere?" "I don't care about your threats anymore," Maria replied, her voice steady. "You're hurting them, and I won't stand by and watch you do it any longer. Daniel felt a surge of admiration for Maria. She had risked everything to protect his children. In that moment, he realized how far Maria had gone to ensure their safety. She had been quietly standing between them and the storm that was Linda, never once backing down. The woman who had always been a background figure was now the unsung hero of his family. But it wasn't enough anymore. Daniel could no longer stay hidden. The time to confront Linda had come. With a deep breath, he tore off his plumber disguise. The worn boots, the cap, the fake beard, they were all gone. He stood tall, his heart pounding as he stepped into the kitchen, his voice cold and resolute. "I've been here the whole time," Daniel said, his words cutting through the tension like a knife. Linda froze. Her eyes widened in disbelief as she turned to face him. The woman who had been so confident, so controlling, was now confronted by the man she had deceived and mistreated for so long. Daniel reached into his pocket, pulling out the recorder. He pressed play, and Linda's own voice filled the room. The recordings, the hidden truth, all of it was exposed in front of her. "I've got everything you've done on tape," Daniel said, his voice steady. "Every insult, every threat. Every time you made my children cry." Linda's face drained of color as she heard her own words. The evidence was undeniable. She took a step back, her mouth opening and closing in shock. For the first time, her perfect facade began to crack, and panic seeped into her expression. "No," Linda whispered, her voice faltering. "You can't." "I can," Daniel replied sharply. "You thought you could control everything, but you can't. Not anymore." Linda's denial began to crumble, her carefully constructed lies falling apart one by one. She tried to shout over him, tried to make excuses, but nothing could hide the truth now. The woman who had controlled everything with fear and manipulation was now exposed for what she truly was. "I didn't mean it like that," she stammered, her voice breaking. "I was just—" "No," Daniel cut her off, his voice unwavering. "This isn't about misunderstandings. This is about you hurting my children, and I won't let you get away with it." The confrontation escalated as Linda's composure continued to shatter. She stumbled backward, eyes wild with panic. "I can't go to jail," she cried, her voice rising in desperation. "You can't do this to me!" "It's too late for that," Daniel said, his voice calm but resolute. "The damage is done." As Linda stood there, floundering in shock and denial, Daniel's mind was made up. It was time for Linda to face the consequences of her actions. There was no more room for excuses, no more time to wait. His children were no longer going to live in fear, and he wasn't going to let anyone, not Linda, not anyone, take that away from them. The final showdown had begun. Linda stood frozen, her wide eyes locked on Daniel as the last remnants of her facade crumbled. For the first time, she was the one caught in the act, exposed, vulnerable, and unable to hide. But even in this moment of defeat, Linda's pride and arrogance didn't waver. She straightened up, regaining some semblance of control, her face a mask of defiance. "You don't know what you're talking about," Linda hissed, her voice trembling with desperation. "You've misunderstood everything. This is just some kind of mistake. You're going to ruin everything over a few recordings? You don't know what's really going on." Daniel's jaw clenched as he watched her spin her lies, trying to shift the blame, trying to manipulate the situation as if she still had the power to control him. He'd seen her do it before, charm her way out of trouble, twist the narrative to suit her needs. But now, there was no escaping the truth. "No, Linda, I know exactly what's going on," Daniel said quietly, his voice cold and unwavering. "I've watched you for weeks, heard you, and now I have the proof." He held up the recorder again, the device that had captured her cruelty. "You can't lie your way out of this anymore." Her face twisted in a mixture of panic and rage. "You think you can just expose me?" she spat, stepping toward him, her fingers trembling with fury. "You think I'm afraid of you? You have no idea what I can do. I'll take everything from you, Daniel. Your money, your empire. I'll take it all. I'll make sure you never see your children again. You think the courts will believe you over me?" Her words were a threat, a hollow attempt to scare him, but Daniel stood firm. His resolve was stronger than it had ever been. Linda's threats no longer held any power over him. "Take everything if you think you can," Daniel said, his voice devoid of emotion. "But you won't take my children. Not anymore. I've waited too long, ignored too much, for this to end with more of your lies." Linda faltered for a moment, her expression flickering with uncertainty as the weight of her words settled in. She had always been in control, until now. Now, Daniel was the one standing tall, and she was the one on the defensive. The realization seemed to hit her all at once. She had pushed too far, too many lies, too many threats. She had underestimated Daniel for far too long. Her voice dropped to a near whisper, filled with venom. "You'll regret this. You have no idea what's coming for you." Daniel didn't flinch. Instead, he pulled out his phone, dialing the number for the authorities. His fingers moved swiftly, each one pressing the button with purpose. As the phone rang, Linda's eyes widened, and she took a step back, the anger turning into fear. "No, you don't," Linda began, but her words were cut off by Daniel's calm voice as he spoke into the phone. "I need the police. There's been abuse in my household. My wife has been harming my children. I have the evidence, and I need immediate assistance." The words were clear, unwavering, and the final nail in the coffin for Linda. She staggered back, her face pale, as she realized that Daniel had no intention of letting her off the hook this time. The authorities arrived soon after, and Linda's world began to unravel. The truth, now inescapable, was exposed to the world. The extent of her cruelty, the manipulation, and the lies she had woven to maintain her control. The news spread quickly, and soon the public learned of Linda's actions. The Prescott family's image, once pristine, was shattered. But Daniel didn't care. Not anymore. His primary focus was no longer his wealth or his status. It was his children's safety. As the officers escorted Linda out of the house in handcuffs, Daniel felt a strange sense of relief wash over him. It wasn't justice yet, but it was the first step toward it. The kids were safe. They would be safe now. That was all that mattered. As Linda was taken away, Daniel turned to Sarah and James, who stood behind him in the doorway, watching everything unfold. Their eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. But there was something else there too. Hope. For the first time in weeks, Daniel allowed himself a small smile. He had protected them, and he would do whatever it took to make sure they would never have to endure that kind of fear again. "Let's go inside," Daniel said softly to the children, his voice filled with promise. "It's over now. You're safe." And as they walked back into the house, Daniel knew that they would begin to heal, together. The house was quieter now. The chaos, the constant tension, had been replaced by a fragile calm that seemed too delicate to hold. For the first time in months, Daniel could breathe easily. Linda was gone, and the children were safe. But the damage she had caused was deep, and the healing process was just beginning. Daniel was determined to rebuild, to create a home where Sarah and James could feel free from fear. They had suffered long enough. No longer would they live under the shadow of a stepmother's cruelty. Now, it was time for them to heal, for them to reclaim their childhood, their joy, and their trust in the world. The first step was to ensure they felt loved, protected, and heard. Daniel made sure the children knew they were his priority, spending as much time as possible with them. He would read to them at night, help Sarah with her homework, and take James to the park to play. He watched as the children slowly began to open up, their laughter returning, their smiles becoming more genuine each day. The walls that had been built between them, born out of fear and confusion, began to crumble, brick by brick. Maria, ever the quiet but steadfast presence, played a key role in their healing. She had been their protector all along, the silent force that had shielded them from Linda's cruelty. But now, with Linda gone, Maria's role became even more important. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was a mother figure to Sarah and James, offering them the stability and care they had always needed but never received. Maria helped the children process their emotions, guiding them through the overwhelming feelings of betrayal and confusion. Her gentle words were a balm for their bruised hearts, and her constant presence was a reassurance that they were no longer alone. Sarah, once shy and fearful, began to blossom under Maria's nurturing care. James, who had withdrawn into silence, started to speak again, his voice no longer muffled by the fear that had once held him captive. Maria's role in their lives went beyond that of a caretaker. She was their anchor, their guide through the storm of emotions they had been forced to weather. She didn't just take care of them. She taught them how to trust again, how to love without fear, how to believe in themselves. Seeing how much Maria had already done for his children, Daniel knew he couldn't let her go. She had become an irreplaceable part of their family, and her presence was a crucial element in their recovery. As a token of his gratitude, Daniel offered Maria a permanent position as the children's caretaker, with a salary and benefits far beyond what she had ever imagined. But it wasn't just about money. Daniel wanted her to know how much her actions meant to him, to the children. She wasn't just a maid. She was a protector, a mother, and now, a vital part of their family. "I don't know how to thank you, Maria," Daniel said one evening, as they sat together in the living room, the children happily playing nearby. "You've done more for them than I could ever have imagined. You're family now." Maria smiled softly, her eyes shining with warmth. "I just did what needed to be done, Mr. Prescott. The children needed someone to care for them, someone who wouldn't turn away. It's my honor." Daniel's heart swelled with gratitude. He couldn't imagine what the children would have gone through if Maria hadn't been there. He could never repay her for the kindness and courage she had shown. With Linda gone, Daniel turned his focus fully to Sarah and James. He knew the journey to rebuild their family wouldn't be easy, but he was committed to it. He took them to therapy sessions, helping them work through their trauma in a safe environment. Together, they started to rebuild trust in one another, learning to laugh, to love, and to dream again. As the days passed, Daniel could see the transformation in his children. They were no longer the broken, frightened children who had been terrorized by Linda's cruelty. They were healing. They were whole again. Together, Daniel, Maria, Sarah, and James began a new chapter in their lives. It wasn't the life they had planned, but it was one filled with love, safety, and the promise of a brighter future. The pain of the past would never disappear, but it was no longer their present. And in that, Daniel found peace. As Daniel sat on the balcony, the warm evening breeze rustling the trees in the yard, his thoughts drifted back to everything that had led him to this moment. His fingers traced the glass of whiskey in his hand, but it was the stillness in the air that filled his mind. The house, once filled with tension and fear, now felt like a true home again. It was a strange sensation, one that felt foreign after all the chaos. But it was also one that brought with it a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. His life had been built on wealth, status, and business empires. He had achieved more than most people could dream of. But as he looked back over the past few months, the lesson that had become glaringly clear was that none of it mattered without his children's happiness and safety. His empire, his success, they were meaningless if the people who mattered most were living in fear. And he had allowed that to happen. It wasn't just Linda's cruelty that had shaken him. It was the realization that he had been blind to his children's pain for so long. He had been so focused on building his legacy, expanding his business, and maintaining his public image that he hadn't seen the cracks in his family. He hadn't seen the subtle changes in Sarah and James. He hadn't recognized the fear in their eyes, the way they shrank from Linda's touch. He had failed them. But now, as he watched them play in the yard with Maria, their laughter filling the air, their smiles free from the weight they had carried for so long, Daniel knew that he had finally made things right. He had learned that love and sacrifice were the real measures of success. Protecting his family, ensuring their happiness and well-being, that was the true legacy he wanted to leave. The journey had been painful, the revelations heart-wrenching, but it had also led him to a deeper understanding of what truly mattered. It had shown him the power of resilience, of standing up against the darkness, and the strength found in those willing to fight for what was right. The person he had once been, the man obsessed with power and status, had been replaced by a father who would do anything to protect his children, and a man who now understood the depth of his own humanity. Looking at the future, Daniel felt a renewed sense of hope. Linda was gone, and she would never be allowed to return to their lives. Her presence had been a dark cloud that had loomed over them for too long, but now it was gone. The Prescott family had been shattered, but they had come back together stronger than before. The damage that Linda had done couldn't be erased, but it was being healed day by day with love, support, and care. Daniel had learned that the future wasn't something he could control, but it was something he could shape with the right intentions and the right people by his side. Maria had become an integral part of their healing, more than just a maid or a caretaker. She was a protector, a mother figure to Sarah and James, and a trusted ally to Daniel. He owed her more than he could ever say. Without her, the children might never have felt safe enough to heal. She had been the steady hand that guided them through the storm, and now she was a permanent part of their family. Daniel looked up at the sky as the sun began to set, the vibrant colors of the evening sky casting a warm glow over the yard. Maria stood beside him, watching as Sarah and James ran around, their laughter ringing in the air like music. For the first time in years, Daniel felt the weight of the world lift from his shoulders. The battle had been hard, but the victory was worth every sacrifice. "You saved them," Daniel said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude as he turned to Maria. She looked at him, her smile soft but full of quiet strength. "I couldn't have done it without you," Daniel continued, his words sincere. "You gave them something I couldn't. You gave them hope." Maria's smile grew faint but genuine, her eyes glistening with something close to pride. "We saved them," she replied softly. "Together." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel felt a sense of peace settle in his chest. The Prescott family had weathered the storm, and now they stood stronger, united, and ready to face whatever came next. For the first time in years, Daniel felt the weight of his decisions lift, replaced by the warmth of knowing that his family was safe, his children were happy, and their future was theirs to build together.